Good evening, everyone. My name is Asad Lalji. Welcome to another exciting session of Avid Online. I hope all of you have been staying in and have been tuning in to our online episodes and live sessions. For those who have not attended an Avid Learning program before, please find a brief introduction posted in the chat section along with our other illustrious partners. Avid Online was launched as a digital further learning campaign and a direct response to the global pandemic on the 1st of April 2020. The objective was to enable our patrons and stakeholders, like yourselves, to engage with a range of topics across the breadth of the arts in this unprecedented time. The focus of this campaign is to keep members of the creative community connected, facilitate interactions, exchange of ideas, looking to the future with optimism, hope, and renewed learning. Over the 4 months, we have curated and published over 100 programs. This is our 101st edition, a mix of live sessions and Avid Online videos. We'd like to thank you for the encouragement, tuning in as you have done today, or accessing our programs on YouTube at your convenience. As we continue this campaign, we build on our offline discussions and continue to partner with our longtime collaborators, as we have done today, and engage with new themes, perspectives, organizations to reinforce our mantra that learning never stops. In this vein, we bring you tonight's panel discussion. This discussion is part of our ongoing series, Sustainability Now, a thematized and targeted series of discussions, videos, masterclasses, and more that aim to convert audiences into change makers, active catalysts, and custodians for a greener future. I'd like to thank Mr. Sabyasachi Mukherjee, Brinda Miller, Joyati Urvashi, and the rest of the CSMBS team to collaborating with us to bring you this series. I hope you caught some of the fascinating videos we showcased this week on sustainable practices in the food industry, in the fashion industry, as part of the special ongoing week dedicated to sustainability and continuing conversations for a greener future. This brings me to our evening session. The Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj Vastu Sangrahalaya and Avid Learning present Sustainability Now, Technology for Greener Living, a panel discussion uncovering the systems and practices adopted by professionals in the industry that are carving out pathways to a more sustainable future and a current reality. I'd like to give a warm virtual welcome to our panel, co-founder and managing director of Aparo Green Tech, Abhijit Sirkar,
Good evening, good evening.
co-founder co-founder of Karo Sambhav, Pranshu Singhal, co-founder and managing director of STEP, Jyoti Palekar, who will be in conversation with our moderator for the evening, founder and creative director of Brand Studio, Sudhir Bhatia. For more of our respected panelists, please refer to the link where their bios have been posted in the chat section. Also, they have been shared with you earlier in an email as part of your confirmation. Please note that this session will be about 75 minutes, followed by a 15-minute Q&A with Sudhir, who will take questions and comments submitted by the audiences. So do keep your questions ready and submit them into the chat box. Thank you for tuning into this session once again. Over to you, Sudhir, and look forward to a vibrant discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Asad. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Welcome everybody to this session today. And thank you, Avid, for including sustainability in your program. And as Asad said, today we will continue the series of food and fashion that they've been hosting so far. And today we'll focus on technology and how technology can be leveraged towards sustainable development, environmental conservation, and preservation. So sustainability is this huge topic. You know, I was trying to get my head around it. I've worked in it, and I thought maybe the best way to kind of introduce it to the audience today was through the 17 UN Sustainability Goals. And those goals are mostly focused on ending poverty, protecting the planet, and ensuring peace and prosperity. And the goal is really targeted to be achieved by 2030, which is really not that far away, 10 years. We have a lot of work ahead of us, and I think these panels are some of the initiatives to kind of get everybody to change their minds and move towards that. So today we have 3 experts in the area of sustainability that focus here in Mumbai, and they will be covering some of the 17 goals, not all the 17 goals. And specifically, we will cover waste management, renewable energy, water consumption, conservation, and a few other topics. So to start with, I thought, when Asad called me and said, let's do this, I was reading some articles, and I came across a couple of articles. The first one, and I'll tell you 2 very short stories before we get started. First one, kind of doomsday, not very great, a scientific report. And the second one, more positive, maybe tells us that the tide might be turning, and some good news. So let's look at the scientific report. It was published in the New York, the article I read was in the New York Times, and it was about a publication from the journal Proceedings of the National Academy of Science. And what they were talking about was that the temperature rising in the next 50 years will probably be greater than the rise that has happened over the last 6,000 years. And today, 1% of the earth is uninhabitable. These are areas in the Sahara Desert which are extremely hot. What they're talking about is that by 2070, which is 50 years away, 20% of the earth will see extreme rises in temperature, putting a third of the population at risk of heat, hunger, migration, and political chaos. Doesn't sound very good, right? So, but now let's look at what some of the others are doing and what we might say that there is hope, right? Let's look at the investment people, right? So there's this large investment house, the largest asset management company in the world called BlackRock. They manage $7 trillion of investment. And what they are doing is they're putting climate change at the center of their investment strategy. The CEO, Larry Fink, this year announced that BlackRock will exit investments that present a high sustainability-related risk. And he didn't do this because people were protesting outside their headquarters. He did this because it made economic sense, right? What he said is, if more and more people believe that climate change is going to impact the valuation of their portfolios, then BlackRock is going to shape their portfolios that it's going to have less risk. And that's a great sign. If the monies are flowing in the right direction, the businesses will start doing the right thing. So I want to now kind of get away from that big picture. Let's bring it back home. Let's look at the ground realities here. Let's start by taking a glimpse of the environmental degradation that we're seeing here in the country itself, and through these experts that we have here today, and through their experiences. They're really down and dirty on the ground every day, fighting the fight. These are the doctors of the world today, and let's see what they have to say. So to start with, I'll go to you, Jyoti, and could you give us a sense of how the technologies emerged as the result of the Indian environmental regulation?
Hi, Sudhir. Thank you for the introduction. If we really follow the green journey of a country with respect to regulations and initiatives, and how the appropriate technologies developed and used at each phase, we have to go to 1974, when the first legislation came in with respect to controlling the water pollution. We actually, that regulation was talking about cleaning our effluents and preventing it from contaminating the ecology and the environment. And we looked at the technologies like chemical treatment, use microorganisms to degrade the organic matter from the wastewater. So technologies were fairly simple. in 1981, we started, there was a regulation respected to air pollution control. Again, we needed to clean our emissions, put back filters, electrostatic precipitators to remove the particulate matter from our emissions. We use scrubber to scrub the toxic gases from our emissions. And till 1986, our focus was on cleaning or preventing the contamination or pollution. And in 1986, there was a regulation called Environment Protection Act. And there we started, our focus shifted from pollution control to protecting the environment. And there we added the software in our technology kitty. We started predicting the air quality, water quality, noise level post start of our project. And we started predicting, we started mitigating the impact from 1986. Then, meanwhile, we also tried our technologies to, with respect to the global treaties and protocols. We developed alternative for CFCs to prevent the ozone layer depletion. We had catalytic converters fitted to our automobile to comply with the Euro or the Bharat standards. Between 2000 to 2010, most of our technologies were focused towards recycle and reuse. I'm sure Abhijit or Pranshu will talk about e-waste recycling, but we focused our technologies towards e-waste management, recycling. Then battery, we recovered metals from our battery waste. We started looking at water as resource. We had a lot of technologies through which we could recycle our water for process use, for boiler to generate steam, or for as a cooling water. And our real journey started, which is the voluntary efforts towards sustainability from 2010. And there now our technology focus totally shifted to renewable energy. We started looking at solar power. We were looking, but we started looking in detail with renewable energy, carbon capture. We brought green chemistry actively. We replaced the environmentally polluted raw material with more friendly one. We had a lot of data management and also a lot of online monitoring. We use life cycle assessment tool, a platform, a software platform to predict the impact, environmental footprint from the resource management to production, to product use, to product end of product life cycles. And now, since last year, we are actively into circular economy. We are changing from our linear model, which is manufacture, use and throw, to manufacture, use and recycle. And all our technology has been diverted to product development, driving new processes, new communication channel we have opening, and we are increasing our operational efficiency. I think in short, this is how our journey has been.
That's great. That's great. That's great. I love the fact that we're going to this circular economy, and that's really super. So I want to move to Pranshu, and you run Karosambhav, and you focus on e-waste, and we all generate e-waste. I am always worried about when we buy a laptop or a mobile phone, or worse yet, a big 42-inch LCD display with liquid crystal, no idea where this liquid crystal is going. Could you quantify this problem for someone that doesn't really understand what e-waste is, and what is it doing to the environment, number one? And also, could you, what are producers being made responsible for this waste? Are producers being made responsible for this waste?
Sure. Thank you, Sudhir. So I'll first like to thank you for initiating the webinar, and I'll start from where Jyoti kind of left. So one of the big changes that Indian regulation and the whole regulatory landscape has seen in the last few years is moving from a very product and manufacturing based regulation to a product centric. And at the heart of this thinking lies a principle called extended producer responsibility, which focuses on taking the movement of solving the environmental and social problems from production patterns to consumption patterns. And e-waste is essentially a big problem on the consumption side. Uh, I don't know how many of us are aware, but e-waste is today the fastest growing waste stream of the world with a CAGR of more than 30%. India, in the last 3 years itself, has moved from being a fifth largest, globally largest producer of electronic waste to third, with just China and US ahead of India. And the numbers are very large. So globally, it is estimated that 53.6 million tons of electronic waste is generated. And this comes from a global e-waste monitor report. And this number is increasing significantly, as I said, at a very, very rapid pace. India is a huge contributor. Now, what is electronic waste? So anything actually which works on electricity, once you have decided that you don't want to use it, can be classified as electronic waste. A lot of people sometimes confuse electronic waste with products which can be reused. So we are really not talking of products which can be reused, which can be repaired and resold back in the market. We are essentially talking of dead products. So dead mobile phones, laptops, uh, computers, notepads, tablets, televisions, refrigerators, a very, very large chunk of waste. And what is happening is that uh, the pattern towards consuming them is increasing. And especially if we start looking at just last 3 months, the consumption of electronics has increased manifold. All of us now want to have a laptop. Almost all offices are switching that they are, because their staff is working from home, to provide them laptops, mobile. The number of mobile phones actually today used worldwide is more than the number of people who exist on the planet. If you look at very Indian scenario, on an average, Indian and at an all India level is generating 6 kilograms of electronic waste in a year. So these are staggering numbers and growing, and this really requires a very, very focused attention. And that is where the principle of extended producer responsibility has been considered. It has been debated, and uh, so what government has done, and this is a global movement, that producers, brands who are putting a product on the market are now being given the prime responsibility of collecting these products back from the market, and essentially ensuring that these products are recycled, these products are brought back to the elemental form. It's really like, if I were to take an analogy, we all created a rocket to send a man to the moon, but never thought about how do we get it back, how do we get it back. And so we are creating all these endless products by combining materials and elements in different compounds. And how do we bring them back to the elemental form has not even been thought through or not even been designed. So we have, if we start looking at our economy, it's really essentially half of the economy. The other half, which is about bringing it back, has not even been designed or discussed. And that is a larger debate. And it really goes beyond electronics and goes to the heart of what is sustainable consumption and how do we change these patterns of production and consumption. And this is where the whole idea of circular economy has come into being, on closing the loops, essentially.
So that's, I mean, what you're saying is we talked about circular, we've come to this area of circularity where we've arrived at circularity, and you're saying that producers are now being made responsible for taking the cycles back. I'm assuming that this is leading to some kind of regulation, and I guess, Abhijit,
Yes.
to bring you into the discussion, how are these regulations? I'm sure this is one of the regulations. There are probably many regulations out there. I believe from our discussions that India we don't have any shortage of regulations. We might be on par with the Scandinavian countries on regulations. The question is, are we meeting these regulations? If not, what can we do to enforce them? Is there some technology for monitoring, for getting companies to really do it, to report it? What are we doing?
See, as of now, the regulations are there, but like we spoke the other day, even Pranshul had mentioned, there are too many regulations, and the guys implementing it are not really sure of what the regulations are about on the field. So it gets into a very strenuous process to implement these regulations. For example, the Thane Creek, there's a bird sanctuary now. Flamingos come there regularly, and we had gone there to see the water pollution, and there was really a lot of water pollution in the creek because all our landfills are surrounded around that area. All our major landfills and all the leachate and all the waste comes into the creek. We had gone to give a solution for putting up trash booms to catch the floating waste so that it can be picked up, as well as dredge it because the silt is below the ground also, and then treat the water. But the problem arises with the regulations again, that there are two, three departments always involved. This came under the mangrove cell, then there was the local municipal corporation, then it was under the town Sitco also. So 3 to 4 bodies, plus you have to go to the CPCD also, the MPCD, which is the local Maharashtra Pollution Control Board, and get permissions from everyone. So coordinating all that for one person to do, it should be linked intergovernmentally, ideally. Everything should be linked intergovernmentally, so it's easier for everyone to just make one paper and everything happens. But that's not the case as of now. And same thing with solid waste treatment, plastic. The rule was there for plastic, but it's in the starting stages now, Sudhir. So everything, there are a lot of rules. I think there are excess of rules, and we need to just get the rules a little low and implementation a little higher.
Okay, so what you're, there are solutions there. There is regulation there.
Absolutely.
There's good intentions, at least in the regulations, but implementation is not there. And are there just really quick, Pranshu? Do you know of any technologies out there that we can apply to bring this kind of cross-departmental coordination? I don't know, like things like SAP. Is there software to get people together, or is this really just some? Can you point to any technology that can?
Yeah, so again, the advent of technologies to really solve waste problems has come along with EPR as a principle, because what is required is full visibility on what is happening, what kind of products have been put on the market, and really recognize them at the end of their life so that they can be settled into the system back. So there are multiple systems today which exist globally, where whenever a product is coming back into the system, it is recognized. So including the fact that today in India, majority of the waste is handled by the informal sector. So how do we account for this waste? Whether it is plastic waste, electronic waste, name it. Any waste category is today handled by the informal sector, and that is today largely unaccounted in the system. So Korosamba, for example, has its own technology platform which enables something very, very similar, where any waste which has gone into the informal sector is accounted for and then looped in back to ensure that we really account for this waste. Because sometimes the numbers that are declared today are really not the right numbers, because waste is really disappearing. It all ends.
Yes.
And any true system will require a very end-to-end mass balance of the waste system, of the waste which is getting generated. And there are certain platforms which even Government of India is creating. CDEC is working on these platforms for some complex waste categories like electronic waste. Also for plastic waste, something is being discussed. But they would be required if we have to solve the problem at scale.
Okay, so these are software platforms, right, that are used between departments. Okay. We can probably stay on one topic, but I want to move on to other topics, and we'll come back to the informal sector in a little bit. So I wanted to talk about water for a minute, and 3% of the Earth's water today. I mean, we're surrounded by water, right? But only 3%
is usable. Yes.
Right, and is usable, and we're using it faster and faster, and the temperatures are rising, and there's less water. So water is a huge challenge. There's going to be scarcity more and more as the temperatures go up. So we have to find important strategies, right? Like to reduce consumption, to replenish water sources, and to reuse. So the sixth Sustainable Development Goal, which it talks
Yes.
about, is about clean water and sanitization.
Sanitation.
And they want
Yes.
to improve water quality by reducing pollution, eliminating dumping, and minimizing the release of hazardous chemicals into the material. So the question here to Jyoti is, what technical advancements are being made so that companies reduce their release of wastewater into the environment?
Uh, as uh, as we progressed and the regulation became stringent, water became a scarce resource and the water tariff increased. So the water availability being a big issue, the service providers like the municipal corporation or the local panchayats or the water bodies as well as the industry have to look for a sustainable source. And there the all efforts were concentrated on treating the water to more advanced treatment like photochemical oxidation, chemical oxidation, putting membrane filtration in place so that we could recycle our maximum water. Industry started using it back as a part of their more as a mandatory requirement than a voluntary requirement. So we really started a lot of effort on improving our water quality and looking at for the alternate source. So we also started looking at generating value. We started segregating our stream. Earlier, what we used to call was end of pipe. Everything effluent or water used to mix and then treated. Now we started segregating the streams. We started recovering byproducts. We started getting value added byproducts. Like biogas is an example. So over the journey, we looked at these different technologies for the advantage so that we could find a good source other than the source where we compete with the community or with the residents. And as a result, actually, we will talk about it little later, but we started, the industry started using the city sanitary wastewater as their water resource by
Yes.
treating it.
Yes. Yes.
So we have come, with respect to water, there are a lot of regulations, at least for the industry. At home front level, yes, large townships, it is mandatory for them to treat the sewage and use it for toilet flushing. And rainwater harvesting was another area where we tried to create any alternate greener water source
Okay.
through
Interesting that
technological innovations.
I think of segregation only I've never thought of segregation of water streams, and
Of
I
course.
thought that was just that's something it was new for me to learn. I thought segregation was just of all this
No, no.
trash that we throw out, but you segregate even water,
Yeah.
and the creation of biogas. I was like, so you can pull out biogas from water sources?
Yes.
Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Yes,
Okay,
from
interesting,
nalas because they're emanating all
interesting.
those gases, na Sudhir?
Yeah, Abhijit, in APRO Green Tech, you work on water management solutions, you work on
Yes,
lakes, you work
we
on
do.
nalas, right?
We
And
do.
that's and Mumbai, I was just horrified. I didn't really know this fact, and when I learned this, 276 kilometers of large nalas in Mumbai and some 450
Yes.
kilometers of small scale nalas, and I was just shocked. I didn't realize you could have that many nalas in the city, and where are they? Mithi River being one of them.
Yes.
So, what is the environmental impact do these nalas have on the city,
Okay.
and what is the
Yeah.
city doing to manage them?
Okay. So, Sudhir, so now they are nalas. What we are seeing are nalas. Originally, these were outlets to the river. So basically,
Okay.
they were all river bodies. The rivers start out at Thane, Poisar, the Boisar, and the rivers Mithi is part of them. Lokhandwala also has a river which flows out into the sea. All these were small outcrops of the river,
Mhm.
which have now, due to urbanization, firstly, we shut the flow of the rivers by making it concrete on both sides. And
Mhm.
that stops the root systems and the ecology from getting into and cleaning the water systems. So slowly, slums and other habitants come up next to these nalas, and more than 30% of their waste is dumped into the nalas, causing which just the plastic bag is filled and thrown in. So these were all originally water bodies, which are now due to urbanization and 25 plus million people of us living in Mumbai, being turned into stinky nalas. And it's us who's done it, and it's us who will have to get it back to its original state. because the environment takes its own time, and we've accelerated that graph so fast. It's us only who have to now treat it. We have to put up these trash booms for all our floating garbage nets below to get the other garbage, so that it doesn't finally go into the coastal system. Because what the coastal system is doing is just spitting it back out, and
Mhm.
again it's been picked up with all the sand, which takes a lot of time to be made, thousands of years, and that is taken with the waste and just dumped to a landfill, which is again close to a water body, and so it's a vicious cycle. It's a vicious cycle. So for these nalas, we have to treat them. They are bioenzyme. What we are doing is giving bioenzyme treatments. So these are probiotic treatments. The enzymes are made to go and attack the pollution-causing toxins,
Mm.
and they do it between 24 to 48 hours. And after that, the dissolved solids have to be picked up, and the water oxygen levels increase. So once the oxygen level increases, the water itself starts treating itself, and the nala systems concretization has to be less, and they have to basically educate the people living around those spaces how to segregate their waste, give them some value for recycle of segregating their waste, so that they don't just dump it into the water streams. And to
Okay.
do that, the government is now using technology. There is the drone system contract which has just been put up. There's a tender for it. So the whole thing will be mapped by GIS and GPS. They will do scannings of all the hutmen and every possible, as you say, living body next to the nalas. And
Mhm.
after that, they will try to make a full plan based on all those systems and technology through the zone to get some positive, outcome. Because we need a positive outcome, and just a few government has to support in this.
And what is the state? I mean, today they are doing this cleaning,
They
but
do it
are
just
these
before the monsoons. The rest of the year, it's just how it is. So just before the
okay?
monsoon, there's a contract given and it's clean, but that's not enough, Sudeep.
So how often should it be done?
It should be done regularly. I say every 3 to 4 months.
Okay.
Because normally also people are dumping, that just gets piled up, and when the water comes, it takes everything together.
Okay. Okay. And they're doing it before the monsoons because of the flooding.
Yes, yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
And just given what happened yesterday, I can only imagine there was
See,
probably
these
some serious
systems,
flooding
like
in the
you said,
Nala.
the flooding, they help a lot because they're all tied to the tide system. These were outlets of the river, so they're all tied with
Yeah.
the tide. And all the waste is again going to the mangrove system, which again help us with the tidal system.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if we don't keep these silted and clean, the tide and high tide flows back, Sudhir. And
Yeah.
that's why
Yeah.
the nalas can't suck in any more water.
Okay. So let's hope with the new technology and
Yeah,
systems
I
and
hope
with the
so.
bioenzymes, we're
Yes,
going to
even the
solve.
trash booms coming in, there is a future. There
Yeah.
is a future.
Okay. Great. Great. So the amount of trash, the 12 sustainability development goal focuses on responsible consumption and production, and it states that we need to substantially reduce our waste generation
Yes.
through prevention, reduction, recycling, and reuse. And so Jyoti, this city produces a lot of waste, and I read it produces about 8 to 9,000 tons of mixed waste every single day. 73% of it being food waste, and the rest being solid waste. These are staggering numbers. The landfills are full. Deonar, which is one of the landfills, is saturated, and you know so can you tell us what type of waste management systems and technologies are available to reduce the quantity of waste individuals and businesses are generating every day? And also, what is the state of segregation in Mumbai? And if it was enforced, because I believe it is actually a law that we must segregate, but if it was enforced, what would it result to?
So I'm
Yeah.
taking this, Jyoti ji. Yes, please,
Yeah,
Oh,
Jyoti.
okay.
please.
Uh, we actually, if we say about technology, there are a lot of technologies available. We have technology to segregate our mixed waste. Our waste can be segregated into paper, glass, metal, different grades of plastic. no problem. There are proven and unproven technologies with respect to composting. There is bioremediation. There is incineration for biomedical waste. There is pyrolysis where we could convert our plastic waste into fuel, and we have waste to energy projects generating electricity. So technology, I don't see an issue. The issue is how do we use technology as an enabler with mindset, sustainability mindset, and system thinking. I will give you one classic example. We have best of the technologies where we could use plastic residues back into the production or the supply chain. The problem happens is we need good quality contamination free residue, and that residue can come contamination free if we segregate at source, well segregation at source. The further it is segregated into 7 grades of plastic, because mixed plastic, no recycle can happen. And followed by aggregators keeping it in a good condition, and then it reaches to recycle. So we have to talk about the system thinking. The system is very, very important for a technology to function. I would like to give an example of reverse vending machine. These were installed at various stations, railway stations, where a user was to go with a plastic PET bottle and put it into the machine, and you get 1 rupee back. And the bottle is crushed. Now, what used to happen is, first of all, whether we need a technology, because we are recycling about 80% to 85% of PET back into the system to make fibers out of it. So we have a system in place. Second thing is, when we crush a transparent bottle along with a colored bottle and the polypropylene lid, it whole picture becomes impossible to recycle. So how our technologies, at what point we want to bring in, plays a very important role. I also want to say what as an individual we can do. We have to look at and respect 12 R's. We have been aware of reduce, recycle and reuse. But if you talk of 12 R's, the 4 R's are only pertaining to waste reduction, which everyone could do. Refuse, reduce, reuse, and return. Return with respect to e-waste more. Yeah. We could do minor modifications, technology and engineering, and we could repair before it ends its life, renovate and refurbish. And we need technology for recycle, recover, redesign, remanufacture, and rethink. And I think we need not only hardware, but equipment, but we need software for this kind of thinking. And we need strong partnerships, we need strong collaborations with our service providers, and that's the way to go forward. And we need a holistic approach rather than a knee-jerk reaction, what we always see when a regulation or a ban comes in.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing up the 12 hours. I think everybody probably knows the only 3 or 4 hours, and that there are more. So everybody, please go to Google today, tonight, and go check out all the hours that there are and see what you can do. So you're not just recycling. It's not just about recycling, right? With that said, I think on October 2nd, right, 2019, the 158th birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi, the central government put out this nationwide ban on single-use plastic. Great. To me, it was like, wow, this is amazing that they're doing this. We thought they were making headway, and the stores stopped carrying plastic bags, and straws disappeared from, plastic straws disappeared from the restaurants, and they moved to other alternate sustainable options. And then, boom, we come up with COVID, right? And what does COVID bring? It brings N95 masks, which have got some forms of plastic in it. It's got plastic shields, PPE suits, and gloves, and more and more. And it just seems like, oh my God, we were just going in the right direction, and now again. But what it did tell us is that we cannot get away from plastic, right? And we learned that plastic is required in some situations. So, Pranshu, can you tell us what are the responsible strategies we need to apply to manage regular plastic waste? And now that we have this huge amount of contaminated plastic, what are the strategies we need to apply? And what is the role of technology in plastic waste management? Can you elaborate on that?
So the biggest, if you were to talk of plastic waste, and I will talk of non-contaminated plastic waste first before getting into contaminated plastic waste. Uh, there is no one solution, and this really depends on the type of plastic which is being used. So, like Jyoti mentioned, PET has a very high recycling rate, and almost 85-90% of the PET is today being picked up and recycled. Informal economy already exists on PET. Similarly, if we talk of other categories which are hard plastics, so HDPE or even flexible plastics like LDPE, majority of these are getting picked again by the informal sector channel and are being recycled. The challenge lies with certain categories like multi-layered packaging, with the polythene, the also the thermocols, the uh, polystyrene, the cups, the plates that you all see. Those are almost impossible and very difficult to recycle categories, and almost most of them have to be collected for co-processing. That is the only answer which is today being relied upon.
What
And
kind of processing? What was the processing?
co-processing, so burning for energy.
Okay.
So going to waste to energy plants or going to cement kilns where energy is then utilized back. So these are the only solutions which are existing as of now. There are certain projects like pyrolysis where can we convert some types of plastics back to fuel. Early stages, not necessarily, large scale projects do not really exist. Uh, but at the heart of it, what lies, and this is more of a much larger problem than tech, I would say, which is about the human behavior. That are we willing to participate in these systems? And if we are not willing to participate, honestly, tech can only do so much. You can only try doing so much. Yes, at some point in time, there will be systems, there will be robots who will segregate the waste for on your behalf. But today, that doesn't exist. And producing that robots will again, consume energy, and who will recycle these robots? So it's an endless chain.
Yeah.
The biggest challenge that the country today faces is from a consumer behavior point of view, which is also then reflected in the sustainable consumption point in the SDGs, that which is the 12th SDG, that how do we enable better consumption patterns? How do we enable people to think better, behave better, live better? And that is actually the larger problem than the waste in itself. That how do we bring in that change? How do we create? And again, bringing that change is easier said. Sometimes, we take the route of let's do a lot of awareness programs. Let's go to schools. Let's do this campaign. Let's do that campaign. Uh, there are certain fundamentals which are required before any of these campaigns will work, and that the biggest fundamental point is ease. Is it easy for me to recycle? And if it is not, come what may, you will not find people taking part in recycling. And second is the fiscal incentives for me to participate in any of the schemes that are laid down by the government or laid down by the producers. If there is not enough money which is coming back to me, I am not going to participate. I mean, these are two very fundamental challenges which today exist. And until unless we create systems which can solve this as a issue, we may not find too much of a success. If we talk of again post-COVID, well, COVID is not post anymore as of now. Would love to see that, but all the biomedical waste, and I'm now referring to the plastics, PPE, which are contaminated. Honestly, there seems to be no answer at this point in time. The only answer which is emerging is incineration for this variety of waste. Is that the best answer? The answer is definite no. But at this point in time, there is really it is becoming a global nightmare, and there are no solutions which are in sight for solving this as an issue. So that is what it is at this point in time.
Wow, that's not very encouraging. I can just imagine, and we don't see the end of COVID. At least I don't know when it's going to end. And people are saying 6 months, 1 year, who knows? And even when they get this vaccine out, we're going to have to be very careful for a while after that. So a lot of waste that's being generated. You said something about not enough money coming back to me, and I need to have and making it easy. So you're saying that if we made recycling easier for the consumer, they would recycle. And is it that the consumer needs to get something back for recycling?
Yeah, so most of the studies, and we can talk about multiple product categories, most of the studies show that until unless I am incentivized as an individual, and especially in a country, in most emerging markets, I am not going to participate. Again, because the education system has not really built in that value that everything needs to be recycled. We all talk that India recycles a lot, and हमारे यहाँ तो पहले से kabadi wala system था. But again, if we start really thinking, that is because there is livelihood there. Given a choice, would people like to do what they are doing? The answer is definitely no. So until unless people are really incentivized to participate into a decent collection system, I don't think we are going to see success. And incentives for me are always, they can be fiscal, but they can also be emotional. The thing is, how do we tie in both these incentives to make the larger change? And the whole idea of doing awareness campaigns or driving that systemic messaging is to enable that emotional incentive that I feel guilt-free because I do it. The fiscal incentive is I get 10 rupees, for giving my bottles away. So, and they have to work very handy. They have to work hand in hand to bring in the large-scale impact. And I don't think we are doing really enough work on creating that. And second point that I alluded to is the ease. मेरे लिए कितना आसान है recycle करना. If I have to go to a distance, forget it. There are too many challenges in my daily life that I'm going to segregate and do this and that and that and that. Because yes, I must and I ought to do, but as of now, it is not hitting me in my consciousness. And that's a problem.
So Jyoti, with the segregation that you talked about just a few minutes ago, is there a way to make it easier? Can we address and make it easier? How do we make segregation easier? And pick up, and I don't know, how do we make this thing easier? Is there a way?
I think it is only related to the changing the mindset. If you have mindset, if you have kind of will, you will surely do it. So it is about having the education system. I'm not saying about formal education, but it is about teaching ourselves irrespective of our age, irrespective of our kind of, the background. We need to look at the benefits of segregation. We have to look at the benefit of recycling, because circular economy is going to be the only solution in the future. Let me speak about today talk about Earth Overshoot Day. I do not know whether how many of us really have gone through, but when I searched it, I found a kind of a day which is Earth Overshoot Day, and last year it was on July 29th. What that means is the resources which last for entire to 2019, we consumed it in July 29th, and rest of the period of the year we were borrowing it from the future. So it is about the overshoot day is calculated based on the Earth's capacity to regenerate the resources. And if we don't look at it, if we only look at the short-term solutions, I don't see a way forward. The second thing is today we could push this day to August 22nd because of we significantly improved on our environmental footprint during this COVID pandemic. But the question is, do you want to postpone or push back this day, overshoot day, with your system thinking, design thinking, or you would like to just act as a disaster management? Choice is yours.
And look, I mean, I don't know. I'm a little skeptical of people going through behavior change. I think to contrary to your point, I think we got to put systems in place, make it easy, have all the bins, and also make it mandatory and have a way of monitoring this stuff and going after the people. So I want to just move to this other concept that we're generating so much waste, right? And there's this reuse strategies, you can reuse the waste. And Abhijit, you have worked on end-of-life sustainable practices where you're doing something called upcycling, very interesting concept, where you take waste and you make a new material, a new product out of it.
Yes.
Could you give us an example of what you have done and what impact it has had on the environment? And secondly, is upcycling, is it scalable? Is it a scalable concept?
Yes, of course it is, Sudeep. Thanks for that. And like Jyotiji was saying earlier, the plastics, mixed plastics, have a problem. Once they are mixed, there's no recycling stream for them. So mixed plastics, what we did with the government, the Municipal Corporation of Mumbai in 2013 is we used their facilities where they were making tarmac for the roads. And with the bitumen, you mixed 18 to 20% of your recycled plastics, and we had used tires also, because during the rains there's a problem of mosquito breeding and them not disposing of the tires properly. So the tires were also collected by the BMC staff. It was put in one place. We got it taken to the tire recycling facility. You get crumb rubber instead of the tire, which is then you see it's a rubber. So when you burn it at a certain temperature with the rock and the bitumen, it acts as a binder. So does plastic. It improves the road quality. It improves the water, taking quality of the road, and doesn't break up the rocks, and the road lasts longer. It can take more load. So that was the first project we did with the government body. Secondly, we did with the Tetra Pak. So all Tetra Paks can be recycled into boards and roofing sheets and everything plywood can do. So we use that in all our projects as doors, roofing, and we were making toilets out of that, sustainable toilets which were powered by solar and had a full biomethane system to recycle everything. And after that, we've used boom bricks, which is our patented technology, whereas we use PET bottles and the fly ash, which is the waste from the coal plants. Coal plants generate waste 24 hours. There's no break. There's no holiday. They are generating waste 24 hours, and there are hills and mountains of waste outside coal sites. So what we figured is we need to put it into a carbon sink type of a structure, and the best form of it was a plastic bottle and the easiest available. So we compacted that with the fly ash, and we can use it to develop anything a normal brick can do. And it's bioclimatic. The end structure is bioclimatic in nature, and till the structure is there, the fly ash is not going into the environmental streams. Because I was there for 3 months while making the structure, and the villagers came, twice or thrice to the plant, because the bund which was connecting where the ash was kept had gone into the water source, and the water had turned black. So we have to, and see, making bricks from fly ash is another option, but that takes a huge plant and technology from other countries, so that is also not a great option. And so upcycling leads to using waste in a better way, and in productivity, basically how you can use it to make something better, Sudeep. And that's what.
But but tell me, I mean, these are, as I understand, you've made a road.
Yes.
You've made roofing out of your Tetra Pak. You've made some homes using the PET bottles and fly ash. How scalable is this stuff? And we're moving away from traditional ways of working, and I don't know what are the architects. What would the architects think?
It's always better. Why? Because when you make a clay brick, you're going and taking virgin clay river sand, and then it's heated up and burnt and creating a lot of environment stress. And clay, and same goes with concrete. So everything which is used instead of this has a very large environmental impact, in getting that thing made. And this thing, you're making it out of waste. Plus, if self-help group makes it, it's a good way of getting together. Schools can do it together, self-help group do it together, and if you want to get it made, it's employment route also for people.
But what do you think about the aesthetic value? I mean, we live in a world where people want to look beautiful and
no, there's absolutely no change in the aesthetics. No, absolutely not. It looks like a normal plain brick. It looks like a normal plain house from the outside. Only if you leave.
So segregation is going to be super important, but the Tetra Packs have to be segregated, sent
That
to
is
the,
being done, Sudhir. It already
okay,
being done. Yes.
sent to the manufacturer that makes this out of
Yes. Yes.
Tetra
It's
Packs.
already
Okay.
being done.
Okay. So we've talked about actually the product, and I want to just shift a little bit to a different problem. And Pranshu, you brought this up earlier, and this is part of the eighth Sustainable Development Goal, and that's on decent work and economic growth. And you have all talked about how the technologies exist, the regulations exist, but there are other bigger social issues and behavior change issues, and just helping the people that are maybe doing the good work. And what it talks about, it says is that decent work is that there needs to be decent work for all women and men and equal pay for work of equal value. And they also want to encourage these sectors to have banking accounts and insurance policies and things like that. So, Pranshu, I know you work in this area of where you have said a large percentage of the waste in India is collected by an informal sector. So what would you need? Can you tell us what needs to be done to formalize this sector, and whether it's for e-waste or for all the other forms of waste that are there?
Sure. So the large problem really requires solving the large problem really requires integration of the existing systems. And that integration, the very first step from a pure regulatory point of view is recognition of the system in itself, that this system exists. In many cases, our regulations do not, because it's a problematic area, do not even recognize the role of the informal sector. We have seen that in electronic waste tools, in plastic waste, it is now being recognized in a significant way. But until unless there is recognition that there are people whose livelihood is dependent, and majority of our waste is managed by this group of people, it will never get solved. Then comes in the idea of to solve this, what are the issues? And essentially, it is more of a social transformation rather than an environmental issue with the with the informal sector. It is really about fair wages. It's about work conditions, places where people work, live and work. The kind of and that sometimes also leads to contamination of the whole place that they are living, because they are managing the waste in those places. So the way we have defined the journey of formalization is it's a multi-step approach. It cannot be done on day one. नहीं तो कोई जुड़ेगा ही नहीं. So if you have to make people join the movement, you have to again make it easy for them to join, because no one is going to just change the practices on day one. So the journey that we have decided starts with the formalization journey starts with very simple things like do you have equivalent of a know your customer sort of documentation, having an Aadhaar card, having a bank account, having a identity in the system. And once this is done, so when we approach the informal sector waste pickers and aggregators, the first thing that we focus on is getting an identity, which allows us to then make payments digitally, enable that thing. The second step that we have taken towards formalization is then on safe working practices. And here, partnerships like with International Labour Organization come into being, because many of these spaces have not even been researched enough. Or even if they have been there are multiple civil society organizations who have done this good work, but not converted into a standard which can then be, let's say, adopted by the government of India. And that is what is required, that if we convert it, all this working of what is a good working space, and convert it into a standard which is then mandated by law for any producer, that if you are to work and collect waste via these channels, this is the minimum performing standards of that system. Then the third aspect that we are seeing is on the financial and accounting knowledge. So even if you start paying GST, none of the people are filing their GST returns, and soon they will become non-compliant and illegal. So how do you then start training? And this is the third step that we take. How do you train the informal sector on financial accounting practices? Because if they have to grow the business, it is important money is managed well, cash flow uh, is critical to, especially to these businesses, and because it is really about the movement of the money on a day in day out basis. So if it is not managed in a decent enough way, or there are no credit schemes which are available, that is another big bottleneck for the growth of the informal sector. So these are the three steps that we have taken till now. We are learning on the way. There may be a lot more that will have to be done, but these are the three strong things that we have done over a period of 3 years with the informal sector that we work with.
Okay, that's great. And look, I have this vision. We see these people around in the neighborhood that are collecting all the PET bottles, and I think this is such good work. Actually, they're doing good work, but they're living under a little tent, just off the edge of the road because they have no place to live, and they have these massive bags full of PET bottles and glass bottles and all of this. I just have this vision that in the future, they have like a really nice storefront. It's like a recycling heaven. Like these are the guys who, and they're actually businessmen, right? And they migrate away from this poor lifestyle and become the saviors of our planet because we don't value them, and they're the ones who are collecting all the crap.
So this is all doable. I think what is required is a lot stronger enforcement,
Okay.
because this will require significant investments in the sector, and they are not going to happen on their own. The system has largely failed. This is not something which can work using market-based mechanisms. Market-based mechanisms have largely failed in solving this problem, and that's why regulation, from a ban point of view, from a forcing producers to start investing in these systems, is super critical. And EPR kind of regulation is enabling that to happen. But again, they will also take their own time to settle down and enable this change. What is important is keeping this on your radar, that it is not just about the environmental impact, it is not just about the recycling, but also how of recycling and how does the waste get collected in the first place.
Yeah, yeah, great. Thank you, thank you. So, we're producing so much waste, and one of the things the BMC is doing now is they introduced a waste to energy plant in Deonar landfill, and that's going to generate energy, and that's great. I guess that's one way of generating energy. I'm not sure that's the most clean way of generating energy. The seventh sustainable goal is about affordable and clean energy, and it dictates that we increase the share of renewable energy in our country, we improve the energy efficiency, and we upgrade our technologies. And so I was just looking at what other countries are doing, and Scandinavia tends to be like the top, when it comes to sustainability. Denmark produces 47% of its energy through wind. Wow, through just blowing wind,
Offshore.
right? Free.
Offshore.
Amazing, right? Offshore. They put them in the seas and they have these massive windmills. 3% through solar. So 50% of the Danish power is coming from renewable sources. India, so we looked at India. India generates 421 gigawatts of power every year, and they're expected to produce 38 gigawatts of power out of solar, which is actually quite impressive. 9% of our power is coming from solar. Yeah. So the other thing I read is solar prices are just going down. Wow, 2 rupees, 1.9 rupees a unit for solar, whereas in the future, coal will cost 6.34 per unit. That means we're just going to be moving to solar. That's all great news for everybody. So, Abhijit, what technical advancements are driving this efficiency of solar power, and what is driving the price down so low? And see, the thing is, solar needs batteries.
Yes.
Solar needs solar panels. Solar panels have a 25-year life cycle. Yes. What is happening to all this stuff? Can you talk about it?
Yes, Sudhir, absolutely. So basically, we've capped a 25% tax on China and Malaysia for solar imports, panels and other components. So that's moved us to Vietnam and Thailand, which are giving us, in comparison to what we were getting, a much cheaper deal. So that's helped everyone out. The second reason is there is a lot more demand now for solar, more production. So everything goes in volume. So semiconductor price goes down if there's volume of production. Same with the panels. Earlier, China was only doing that and they had the whole hold in the market, but we are doing quite well now. We have quite a lot of solar farms, solar producing farms. Karnataka is one of the biggest solar farms. There's one at Kamuthi, and that is almost 2250 megawatts. There's another one in Rajasthan at Badla, which is again 2250 megawatts. These are huge in size, and there's cross bidding in all these solar park orders. So the cross bidding is really getting the competition in and the prices down. That's really leading to the price. And if you see in the last 10 to 15 years, there'll be a 70% drop in prices of solar panels. Can you imagine that? 70%.
70%.
Yeah,
Okay.
70%. So
So,
that's,
so if solar is going to become a bigger producer of energy, and maybe we
yes,
move towards a 40% energy of solar, we'll end up having, for solar, you need batteries, right?
yes,
So we're going to have a lot of batteries on our hand, and we're going to have a lot of panels on our hand eventually. Is there a way to take the circularity concept
yes, they are
into
totally
solar?
recyclable. Pranshul would
Can you
also know a
recycle these
little more
batteries?
about batteries with the e-waste stream.
I can talk about solar. At an overall level, we did a program on solar waste, identification. It was a project by Gogla, which is a global industry alliance on solar. It's really on off-grid solar products, which are small lanterns, which are being distributed in small towns. But it also concentrated. It also looked at solar panels. And the bad news is, rather than the good news, is we don't even have any global solution on solar
Yeah,
panels today.
Oh,
We visited some of the plants in Italy who are trying to do it, but it is at a petty scale. And again, under a European Commission funded project where panel by panel things are trying to be solved. But at this point in time, this quantum of waste is just so damn large. I mean, you have these craziest areas full of solar farms where
yeah,
technology will be replaced.
yeah,
And
yeah,
what do you do? And the cost of just transporting that material is humongous.
yeah,
You're
right.
talking about hundreds and thousands of tons of material lying in mostly rural areas. That's the other problem.
Right.
If we look at the solar off-grid material, which is essentially your solar lamps, battery, not just the battery, but lamps essentially, solar lanterns, which have been used at very, very large scale.
Right.
And have really changed how the rural part of India works. They have really lighted the villages, but they are all going to die. And what happens post that death, no one knows, because collecting from, abhi we are unable to collect from urban,
yes,
and these are really the rural of the rural.
yes,
That's where the solar reaches.
Yeah.
Solar is not really even in second tier, third tier towns. It's really rural, and there
I
are no
will.
systems to bring them back.
So, I mean, Jyoti, you talked about circularity before, and do you have anything to say about, this whole systems thinking, circular thinking? How do we bring all of this into the equation and the thought process? I mean, it's complicated, right? I mean, you put it out, everybody's like, let's innovate, we'll make this solar power, we'll give solar to the world, and now we end up with all this waste. So how do we bring this into, how do you, when you work with companies, which you do, when you bring in systems thinking, you bring in circularity into the thinking, how do you do it? How do you convince somebody to bring that way of thinking in?
One of the tool is life cycle assessment, where actually you could predict the environmental impact of any technology, any innovation, any product through the life cycle assessment. You look at the environmental footprint during the extraction, manufacture, product use, and end of the life of that particular product. So that is one way. We have a system in place, and also what needs to be done is when we have innovation in these areas, and today we are right there implementing the circularity in our framework. So if we could bring those issues, like for example, converting the informal sector into formal sector, educating, developing the capabilities, developing the institutional mechanism, working with the service providers, because today everyone is working in silos. If we have those kind of thinking, I think we could, right now it's a time that we built in into our design thinking, all these aspects. The second thing is about changing our mindset from banning to responsible consumption. Ensure sustainability of the services which we give it to into the public domain. We make it affordable, not free. And definitely technology as an enabler, but we have to have a system design in place. And I am a firm believer in that. And when I see technology failing on ground, and most of the time it is about sustainability mindset and system thinking.
So mindset, talking about mindset, Pranshu, you brought this up earlier. Awareness is one of the big issues. And that is, the 12th and the 13th sustainability goals talk about awareness, and it talks about improving education. You're running school programs, but there are so many schools in this country. I mean, 3 million schools in this country. How do we go about making this a mass movement? I mean, what are we supposed to do? What are you doing? And are you creating any frameworks in place that can actually scale?
So, I mean, most of this really requires the idea of winning on the 21st century skills side. If we are enabled better development of 21st century skills amongst the children, I think this problem is going to get solved. And I believe that the new education policy in some way at least is trying to address the problem of rote learning to a critical based thinking sort of a model in some way at least. So what we are trying to do is our focus has been on working with schools. We work with a very small number, 3,000 odd schools at a country level to build capacities of teachers on 21st century skills. And the real world problem that we try to solve with them while we are developing these skills is the recycling or circularity problem. So students have to go figure out, what's happening in their neighborhoods, talk to repair shops, figure out different solutions, analyze the problems. So the idea is to solve a real world problem while ensuring new contemporary learning practices being followed in the school, new pedagogies being planned in the classrooms. Does it lead to a large change? I would like to believe, but again, school systems, the change in school systems will take a very long time to reflect, any sort of an impact, because, what is being taught right now can only be measured 10 years, 15 years down the line. So this is a work which is being put in, but we don't really know how to measure the long-term impact of it. One can measure the short-term, कि बच्चे को कितना समझ में आ गया, is he able to understand circularity as a concept and so forth. या उसने कितना recycle करा 2 दिन में. But does it change to a long-term behavior? Because what we want to do, and this is the most important point I like to emphasize, is we want, even if this person becomes a brand manager, he becomes a marketing manager, he becomes a designer, in every aspect of his job, he's thinking sustainability. And that's the fundamental role of education today in the system. That how do we ensure that level of critical thinking and redesign our system in a way that it can give those desired results. Ki whatever profession I'm in, it is my responsibility to solve this problem. Because it is not an environmentalist who can solve it. It is me. In any profession, in any space that I'm working in, I have the ability to contribute. So how do we create a system which enables that sort of a thinking is critical to this mission.
Yeah, and I, just to add to that, I mean, I work in design and I teach design thinking at the university level, and I run workshops with kids and stuff. But what I've learned, one thing is experiential. Anytime it's experiential, and I like the fact that you said you get them to go to the repair shop, you get them to experience it, and that experience is not just out of a textbook, and then it stays, and you remember it for the rest of your life, because it's, if the experience was actually not by accident, but was by design, I think you can make change, and starting with the 3,000 schools is a great start. Hopefully that as a concept, as a pilot, can be taken and then moved to 9,000, and 100,000 schools. That's where really, I think, we just have to think bigger. And I think all of us have to just think bigger. And that's one of maybe our limitations as individuals. But good start. Thank you for bringing awareness to the people and the society. I want to go to another very serious and important problem, and this is kind of going up to BlackRock moving their investment strategy to sustainability. And maybe Jyoti, you can talk about this, is what would incentivize a business to move towards sustainability? Sustainability has a cost associated to it. So what's the ROI on sustainability? At the end, that's a big problem, right? The textile industry in Bangalore has done some good work. Why did they do good work? What were they doing it for?
There are many things. The prime thing being availability of resources. Even though we say that water is freely available, it is not. People are definitely, when there are scanty rainfalls, people are already experiencing the problem with availability. So business is due to resource management in one area where people would like to go for the sustainability. Sustainability has two factors, pull and push. With other regulation, there is a push, the regulatory push is there. In sustainability, there is no push in India. So how do we have to generate a pull from within, and that most of the industries are doing it because of the business risk. The second push comes from your supply chain or the value chain you are in. Your customers force you to have a sustainability related work doing in your premises, because if you are not complying with clients sustainability strategy or thinking, they will not buy product from you. So there are a lot of such certifications coming in. Fair trade is one of it, responsible farming. There are a lot of things where people have been compelled to follow sustainability. And people are definitely seeing the advantage over a longer run. We are doing a lot of sustainability strategies for our client. We design a roadmap for them. And the benefits are immense. Your brand value increases. Your stakeholders want you to, you are their choice because what you are doing. Your employees are happy about the good work you are doing. So there are several intangible benefits. And what I feel is we did not look at the short-term goals, but over a period, when there is a resilience expected. Today, COVID has one more time proved it, that those industries who had sustainable practices, the governance in place, they are far better they are doing far better in this emergency situation. So you have system in place which is resilient, and you could quickly get back to the any emergency or the disaster management scenario. So those are the biggest advantages industry is seeing it today.
Sudhir, I'm just going to jump in to give you a time check. It's we have reached the time where we're going to start Q&A, so you want to wrap up. But I actually have a quick question which I just wanted to put out to the panel and yourself. Avid has been involved with FICCI for a few years, and we've been curating and convening many conferences around art cities, smart cities. And, in India's smart city mission aims to upgrade and develop our cities with technology at its core. And so how does the concept of sustainable technology factor in with this nationwide incentive? I just want, I'm just throwing this out there. So, bringing the conversation back to technology, which is my focus for today. I'll just give you 15 more minutes to answer. You've got over 20 questions also, which we fed to you all. So Thank you guys. It's been an exciting discussion. So.
Thank you.
Does anybody want to take that on? Any one of the three of you want to talk about the smart city and how sustainable technology is being applied into these smart cities?
There are a lot of changes with the smart cities. They are going towards smart lighting. Because mostly all our lighting is powered by coal-powered systems. Mm-hmm. So smart lighting systems, they are moving to LEDs, which is again giving the bodies the carbon credits because they're changing from an older form of energy to a better form of energy, less reducing energy. They're using more solar power in the smart cities. So there's smart lighting, Asad, there's smart dealing of waste. There's smart living, whereas housing societies are getting smarter with IoT-based system. There's smart, like in Mumbai now, they have put up a smart system in all the nalas to give us an early flood warning. So that's a really good system. So we'll know with the rising of the nalas whether we are going to have early flood. So that is another thing. So a lot of these places, they're smart. Segregation of waste in all these smart cities. You have to deal with your waste. You have to make compost, and that's getting everything together, working as a unit, will really help cities in getting their overall production and reducing their waste, as well as getting people in participating more in renewable energies. Because the more you see renewable energy outdoor in your urban environment, you will also try and replicate that. That is our human nature. So we need to see more renewable initiatives in the urban environment to keep replicating it, and that's
So
what this
let's hope
initiative
our
is all
smart
about.
cities, yeah.
Yeah.
So let's hope our smart cities are taking us, and some of these new smart cities are creating prototypes of what the future will look
Yes.
like.
Yes.
So we have some questions here. The first question here is, what can we do as an individual to reduce production of e-waste? Because unfortunately, it is an essential need. So, Pranshu, e-waste is your thing. What can we as individuals do? And I would say not just in e-waste, generally, maybe you all can talk about what can you all advise us as individuals, what can we do with water, with waste, just everything, just to be more environmentally and make this planet more sustainable. Pranshu, we'll start with you with e-waste.
Yeah, so for electronics, the answer would be a bit different for electronics because it is largely driven by this whole attachment to being extremely fashionable. So in most cases today, we are not really changing devices because they are dead. We are changing devices because we want to have the most fashionable device. I don't want to be
Yeah.
looked upon as a person who is working on an old laptop. I want to have the smartest, the cheapest looking uh, tablet in my hand, so much so, first mobile, I can talk about mobile phone because I have the statistics. Mobile phone lifespan technically is even today, or at least at 4 years. Globally, every 18 months on an average people are discarding it, and this was 2 years back. The latest trend is around 9 months. So yes, so people are really changing, and this is a global average. 9 to 10 months, people are wanting to change their devices. So
Crazy.
I think a lot of it also again goes back to how do we inculcate the idea of critical thinking. हम कर क्यों रहे हैं? And disassociating joy, from buying to consuming or
Yeah.
experiencing.
Yeah.
There are some very fundamental facets of how this society is designed, and until unless we start attacking them, and the only way that I can think is education as a route. Until unless we go back to our creating the right culture, creating the right mindsets, creating the right sanskar, if we were to use it in our society, I don't think we can solve this problem because a lot of it has to do with how we are designing the society. Sorry, I'm taking it to a much deeper level, but the real answer really lies there. We can do
Yeah. Yeah.
certain things here and there, but the fundamental problem is at that level.
Do you guys, Jyoti, do you have anything to say about how we could, what can we do as individuals in our homes tomorrow? I can go and do something tomorrow itself and make a change. What can I do?
It is about awareness and how effectively we use the communication channels. Because I will give you a very simple example of household water purification unit what we use. And if we have a reverse osmosis unit, we are rejecting or we are throwing away 50%, 30 to 50% of water down the drain. Now, how many of us really think whether we need what is our water source and whether that water source demands the requirement of reverse osmosis? What is really reverse osmosis is doing to our water? How can we have an alternate as ultrafiltration and UV radiation if it is a surface water? What happens in case of the multi sources water, what we get, what is a treatment option? So all these things, I think if people know about it, people are aware, there can be a solution. People will definitely comply with the sustainable practices, but we, in spite of having the social media different handles with us, I think how effectively we can use them for spreading awareness and creating the mindset sustainable. I'm coming again and again at this point, but it is need of the hour. Today we cannot really think of having the kind of education, because environmental education came to our education system long back, and I don't see it is the impacts on the ground. So it should not remain in books. The education needs to be smartly conveyed to the people who can take up the more in a responsible manner. And at a higher level, at a country level, we need to decouple economic growth and resource consumption, I think, and create economy around having the circularity. And those are the challenges which we need to face with respect to regulation, with respect to kind of incentive, with respect to communication. So we need a mix of everything. We can't take one kind of an approach to solve this issue, because if we approach the issue with the same mindset and same thinking, we will not be able to find a solution. We will remain where we are unless we really think through and find innovative solutions. And
so what I'll take away from that is that all of you, and to the listeners out there today, all of you are running companies, making products. Think about circularity, bring that into your product development cycle. Think about what and how you're going to get those products back into the land and not destroy it. So I would say take that from the osmosis point of view. The next time anybody moves and buys a filtration system and you're saying, oh, I should buy the osmosis system because somebody told you to get it, think twice. You don't need it for the city. You need it when you're sitting outside and you're taking well water. You might need osmosis. So do think about that. Go ahead. You want to say
well
something?
water with arsenic and fluoride and all the nonsense in it. You don't.
Then we'll go and we'll get the osmosis system and waste 30%. Okay, that's fine, but not otherwise. Another question here. Let's see. Is the concept of carbon credit viable for corporate social responsibility benefits to companies in SEZ? Basically, is this carbon footprint? Is this concept actually something that is making a difference? Maybe Pranchu, do you have any thoughts on that?
So no, I think I'll pass it to Jyoti. Jyoti may be a better person.
Jyoti or Abhijit, you want to take that?
See,
Maybe.
carbon footprints, basically, what is a carbon? Your
Carbon
footprint.
Yeah, the carbon credits.
Yeah, the carbon credit is something you do with technology or some change with renewable energy on your site, which will reduce your consumption of the natural powered sources like coal, example, cement in the building process, and how you treat your waste and everything. So by starting with the carbon process, it's the whole process of your whole building. It doesn't only it starts from start to end. So basically there are two bodies, IGBC, which is the Indian Green Building Council by CII, and the second body is the GRIA body, which is run by TERI. They both do carbon ratings. So there are different systems, how much energy your building's using, how have you changed from that older source, have you changed all your lights to LED, do you have motion sensors, there are a lot of criterias and you get points, and then you're ticked and then you're labeled as a silver, gold or platinum. So based on that, on how much you are doing at your site, you are rated and you get your carbon credits as per that. And carbon credits are reversible. So basically, if you were using, suppose a megawatt of energy from a coal-fired source, and you change to another renewable energy source from a wind or a solar, so all those constitute as your credit. If you're changing from your normal water source, and then reducing your water, that is also your credit. So anyway, you are helping the environment in reducing, that comes into your credit, which is then there's a global scale and global price for the credits, which you then go and you get back your credits. So it's like you get monetary payment for your credits. So us changing all our LED lights constitutes to gigawatts of power getting changed, and all that will be monetary in the end of it, because the global body recognizes that. They say, yes, you were going to burn so much coal and light up all those lights with your transmission costs and everything. You've changed to LED, which is further reducing it by that much. So you have that much saving, of what the old thing was plussed. So all
Right.
that comes into your carbon credit. So I would suggest everyone does it, and it does work. You do get credits back.
Okay, great.
You do get
I,
credits back.
I
Sudhir,
think we
you
have
need
like,
to wrap up now.
yeah,
Almost.
we have 1 minute left. So just a last question over here is that I just want to say, this has been great panel having all of you.
Pleasure.
We've learned a lot. I've personally learned a lot, and I hope the listeners have learned something. There are a lot of questions, guys. We can't really go through all of them, but the couple of things. The circularity point is very important, and design thinking, systems thinking, is very important. And I just want to say that if we take that and apply it to the creation of products and think of the entire cycle and make beautiful products because the materials are actually not so bad, and maybe we have a chance of saving this earth, right? So listen, guys, it's time. I think I want to just thank you all for participating, and it's been a pleasure talking to the three of you. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Sudhir.
Sudhir.
Thank you to all our
Pleasure.
speakers. I mean, it's a truly fascinating discussion. I wish we had more time, but
Us too.
unfortunately we don't. But that's when we have the 2.0 version coming out. A special thank you to our partners, the CSMBS, Mr. Mukherjee, Brinda, Joyti, and Urvashi, for giving us this opportunity to partner with them. Thank you to our audiences for being here. Today and even through the last 4 months. As I said, this is our 101st episode, and we won't do this if it wasn't for you. Stay tuned for more of our engaging programs. As we said, this is a week of sustainability now. The fourth and the last program for this week is a wonderful masterclass on rethinking materials, which will happen on Saturday. And it's being conducted by material explorer Spriha Chokhani at 5 p.m. More information on that workshop is available on our social media handles at Avid Learning or our website at www.avidlearning.in. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful, wonderful evening. Thank you for tuning in. And remember, stay safe. And until next time, remember, learning never stops. Thank you very much.
Thank
Good night.
you.